I never imagined that at 63 years old, after nursing my husband Tom through 5 years of Alzheimer's until his peaceful death, I'd find myself trapped in a nightmare disguised as a second chance at love. Behind the cheerful yellow door of our Cape Cod-style home, my new husband compared everything I did to his late wife Susan, until the day I collapsed while preparing his favorite pot roast, and he rushed me to the emergency room, telling the nurses I'd simply gotten dizzy from the steam. But when the young doctor pulled back the curtain and asked to speak with me alone, his face told me he knew the truth. I'd been too ashamed to admit even to myself. My name is Margaret, and this is my story. Tom and I had been married for 38 years when the diagnosis came. Watching the man I loved forget my name, forget our children, forget how to feed himself, was the hardest thing I'd ever endured. As a retired ICU nurse, I'd cared for countless patients, but caring for your own husband as he slowly disappears is a unique kind of heartbreak. When Tom finally passed in January of 2019, I felt relief mixed with crushing guilt. The hospice counselor suggested I join a caregiver grief support group at the community center. I resisted for months. I'd spent my entire career being the strong one, the caregiver, the person others leaned on. Admitting I needed help felt like weakness. But by June, the silence in my house had become unbearable. My daughter Rebecca lived in Seattle with her family. My son Michael was deployed overseas with the Marines. I'd talk to them on the phone, put on a brave voice, then sit alone at the kitchen table staring at Tom's empty chair. That's where I met David. He walked into the grief group on a Tuesday evening in late June, apologized for being late, and took the seat directly across from me. Distinguished. That's the word that came to mind. Silver hair, warm brown eyes, a cardigan that looked like it came from an expensive catalog. When it was his turn to share, he talked about losing his wife Susan to breast cancer 3 years earlier. "I thought I was doing fine," he said, his voice catching slightly. "But lately I've been feeling so tired. Not physically tired, soul tired, you know? My daughter keeps telling me I need to get out more, stop living in the past. But how do you move forward when part of you is still back there?" I found myself nodding. Everyone in that circle was nodding. We all understood that specific exhaustion. After the meeting, David approached me in the parking lot. "I noticed you're a coffee drinker," he said, gesturing to the travel mug in my hand. "There's a great little place down on Harbor Street. Would you want to grab a cup sometime? Just to talk? These meetings are helpful, but sometimes it's nice to have a conversation that doesn't feel so structured." I should have been more cautious. Tom had only been gone 6 months. But David's smile was kind, and I was so desperately lonely. We exchanged numbers. That coffee turned into weekly meetings. David was easy to talk to. He'd been a high school principal before retiring, and he had that way of asking questions that made you feel truly heard. He told me about Susan, about their 42-year marriage, about how she'd loved gardening and had filled their yard with roses. She had this beautiful rose garden, he'd say, his eyes distant, over 100 bushes. Every color you can imagine. After she died, I couldn't bear to look at them. I had a landscaping company tear them all out and put in grass. My daughter was furious with me, but I couldn't. I told him about Tom's decline, about the guilt I felt for being relieved when he died, about how I sometimes forgot he was gone and would call out to him before remembering. David listened without judgment. He understood. By September, we were seeing each other 3 or 4 times a week. We'd go to lunch, take walks along the beach, visit the farmer's market. It felt good to have companionship again. My friends from the hospital had drifted away during Tom's illness. Most of our couple friends had awkwardly stopped inviting me to things after he died. David filled that void. Susan used to love the farmer's market. He mentioned one Saturday as we browsed the vegetable stands. She'd spend hours picking out the perfect tomatoes. She was very particular about her produce. I laughed. "I just grab whatever looks good and hope for the best." He smiled, but something flickered across his face. "Susan always said, that's how you end up with disappointment." The comment felt slightly off, but I brushed it aside. He was still grieving. It was natural to compare. In October, David invited me to dinner at his home. It was a lovely colonial in the same neighborhood where I'd lived with Tom, just 4 streets over. I'd driven past it 1,000 times without knowing whose it was. The house was immaculate, almost too immaculate, like a showroom. Nothing out of place, nothing personal, except for a few framed photographs of David and Susan. He caught me looking at one on the mantel, their wedding photo. "Doesn't she look beautiful?" he said softly. "That dress took her 6 months to find. She was very particular about everything being perfect." "She was lovely," I agreed, though something about the way he said particular made me uncomfortable. Dinner was nice. David was a surprisingly good cook. As we ate, he told me more about Susan, about her charity work, her book club, her Thursday night bridge games. "Do you play bridge?" he asked. "No, I never learned. Tom and I were more of a Scrabble couple. Susan always said Scrabble was too solitary. Bridge is about partnership, cooperation, reading your partner's mind." The evening continued pleasantly enough, but I noticed he mentioned Susan at least a dozen times. Every topic somehow circled back to her. What Susan thought, what Susan did, how Susan would have handled something. When he asked if I'd like to see Susan's rose garden, or what used to be her rose garden, I agreed. We walked out to the backyard where, indeed, there was just flat grass where the garden had been. "I regret tearing it out now," he said quietly. "Susan put so much work into it. My daughter Margaret was right to be angry. I destroyed something Susan loved." I froze. "Your daughter's name is Margaret?" "Yes, Margaret Ann. She's 41 now, lives in Boston with her husband and 2 kids. Why? That's my name too. Margaret," he smiled. "Susan used to say it was a good, strong name. Classic. Not like these modern names people give their children now." She had very particular opinions about names. The coincidence felt strange, but I didn't say anything. We went back inside, and the rest of the evening passed without incident. By November, David and I had fallen into a comfortable routine. He'd call me every morning at 7:30, right after I finished my coffee. We'd have lunch together at least 3 times a week. On Sundays, we'd go to the early service at his church, then brunch afterward. It was during one of these Sunday brunches that he first said it. I'd ordered the Eggs Benedict. David looked at my plate and said, "Susan always got the fruit parfait. She said Eggs Benedict was too heavy for brunch." I set down my fork. "David, I like Eggs Benedict." Of course," he said quickly. "I just meant Susan had this theory about digestion and heavy foods before noon. She was very health conscious. I tried to let it go, but it bothered me. Not just the comment, but the way he'd said it, like my choice had been somehow wrong. The comparisons started coming more frequently after that. Small things at first. I wore a red sweater to lunch one day. Susan never wore red. She said it was too aggressive. I suggested we try a new Thai restaurant. Susan didn't like Thai food. Too spicy. She preferred Italian. I mentioned wanting to take a watercolor class at the community center. Susan took oil painting classes for years. She said watercolor was too wishy-washy, not enough control over the medium. Each comment alone was harmless. But they were adding up, creating this constant background hum of judgment. I started second-guessing everything I did, everything I wore, everything I said. In December, David proposed. We were walking along the beach at sunset, and he got down on one knee right there in the sand. The ring was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "Susan's ring was a sapphire too," he said as he slipped it on my finger. "She always said diamonds were overrated. I had this ring made in the same style as hers." I should have said no. Every instinct I had as a nurse, every red flag I'd learned to recognize in 40 years of healthcare, was screaming at me to run. But I was lonely, and David was kind most of the time. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone in that house with Tom's ghost. "Yes," I whispered. We married in February, a small ceremony at the courthouse with just his daughter Margaret and her family in attendance. My own children couldn't make it. Rebecca was 8 months pregnant with her 3rd child, and Michael was still deployed. They both expressed concern when I told them about David over the phone. "Mom, isn't this kind of fast?" Rebecca had asked. "You've only known him 7 months." "At my age, honey, I don't have time to waste," I'd replied, trying to sound lighthearted. "But have you really thought this through? What do you actually know about him?" "I know he's a good man who's been through what I've been through. I know he makes me laugh. I know I don't want to be alone anymore." Rebecca had gone quiet on the other end of the line. "Okay, Mom, If you're sure, just promise me you'll be careful. I'd laughed it off. What did I need to be careful about? David was a retired high school principal, a widower, a man who went to church every Sunday and volunteered at the library. What could possibly go wrong? The warning signs came fast after the wedding. David suggested I sell my house. It makes sense, he said. Why maintain two properties? We're married now. We should live together. Susan and I shared everything. That's what marriage is. I hesitated. That house held 38 years of memories with Tom. Every room told a story. The kitchen where we'd cooked countless meals together, the living room where we'd watched our children grow up, the bedroom where I'd held Tom's hand as he took his last breath. I'm not sure I'm ready to sell yet, I said carefully. David's face hardened slightly. Susan would never have hesitated. When we got married, she immediately gave up her apartment and moved into my place. She understood what commitment meant. The comparison stung. Tom and I kept our own homes for the first year of our marriage. We wanted to make sure. Susan said that's a sign of not being fully committed. David interrupted. Half in, half out. That's not a real marriage. Somehow, by the end of the conversation, I'd agreed to list the house. I told myself it was practical. I told myself I was being silly holding on to the past. I told myself David was right about commitment. The house sold in 3 weeks. I moved into David's home with just my personal belongings. Everything else, all of Tom's and my furniture, our photos, our collections, went to storage or to my children. We don't need all that clutter, David had said. Susan always kept a minimal, elegant home. She said too many belongings weigh down the spirit. Walking through David's house those first few weeks, I felt like a guest. Everything was still arranged exactly as Susan had left it. Her photos were everywhere. Her decorating choices, her furniture, her color scheme. I tried to add a few of my own touches, a throw pillow here, a plant there. David removed them. Susan had a very specific aesthetic. These things don't fit. I started to protest, then stopped. What was I going to say? That I wanted to erase his late wife from her own home? That felt cruel. The food comments escalated. I'd been cooking for Tom for nearly 4 decades. I knew my way around a kitchen. But apparently, everything I made was wrong. I roasted a chicken with herbs and lemon. Susan made hers with a dry rub. She said basting made the skin soggy. I baked chocolate chip cookies. Susan only made oatmeal raisin. She said chocolate chips were too juvenile. I tried a new recipe for beef stew. Susan's stew was better. She had a secret ingredient. Worcestershire sauce and a bay leaf. You should try making it her way. I gritted my teeth and smiled. I'll keep that in mind. But I didn't make it her way. I made it my way. The way Tom had loved. David ate it in silence, his disappointment palpable. The criticism spread to other areas. My clothes were wrong. Susan dressed more conservatively. My hair was wrong. Susan wore hers in a neat bob. My hobbies were wrong. Susan spent her free time volunteering, not taking frivolous watercolor classes. I'd signed up for that watercolor class in March, so excited to finally do something creative. I'd been talking about it for weeks. The day before the first session, David sat me down. I've been thinking about this watercolor class, he said. Don't you think it's a bit selfish? Susan spent her free time helping others. She volunteered at the food bank every Tuesday, taught English to immigrants on Thursdays. She always said hobbies were fine, but service to the community was more important. I volunteer at the hospital gift shop, I said defensively. I've been doing that for 20 years. That's wonderful. But adding another activity on top of that? When will you have time for us, for our home? Susan always made sure her schedule had room for us to spend quality time together. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that 2 hours a week for a painting class wasn't going to destroy our marriage. But the way he looked at me, with such disappointment, such sadness, made me feel selfish and small. I canceled the class. My friendship with Linda, my old colleague from the hospital, died next. We'd been meeting for lunch every other Wednesday for 15 years. She'd been there through Tom's illness, through his death, through everything. When I told David about our standing lunch date, he frowned. Every other Wednesday? That's a lot, Margaret. Susan had friends, but she didn't prioritize them over her marriage. She said women who spent too much time with girlfriends were avoiding intimacy with their husbands. Linda and I have been friends for decades, I protested. These lunches are important to me. Of course they are. I'm not saying you can't see Linda. I'm just saying that every other week seems excessive. Susan saw her friends maybe once a month. She understood that marriage came first. I reduced the lunches to once a month. Then David started having conflicts on those days. His Rotary Club meeting got moved to Wednesdays. Could I reschedule? Linda rescheduled. Then David had a doctor's appointment he needed me to drive him to. Then his daughter was visiting, and wouldn't it be rude to leave? After 4 months, Linda stopped reaching out. I didn't blame her. I'd canceled on her so many times. The isolation happened so gradually, I barely noticed. Every friend, every activity, every connection to my old life was slowly severed, always with a reasonable explanation, always with a reference to what Susan would have done. But David's schedule never changed. His Rotary Club meetings every Wednesday, his volunteer work at the library every Thursday, his Sunday golf games with his buddies, those were non-negotiable. When I mentioned the double standard, he looked genuinely confused. Susan never minded my commitments. She encouraged them. She said a man needs his activities to stay mentally sharp. She was very supportive of my leadership role in the community. The financial control started in July. I'd always been independent with money. I'd worked as a nurse for 40 years, had my own pension, my own savings. Tom and I had kept mostly separate accounts, just a joint account for household expenses. David suggested we combine everything. Susan and I had complete financial transparency. We shared everything. That's what real partners do. I hesitated. My nursing pension was mine. I'd earned it. But David looked so hurt by my hesitation. "Don't you trust me?" he asked quietly. Susan trusted me completely. She put my name on everything. She knew I'd always take care of her. Against my better judgment, I agreed to a joint account for household expenses. I kept my pension account separate. David said nothing, but I could see his disapproval. Then came the incident with my car. I'd driven the same Honda Accord for 12 years. It was reliable, paid off, perfect for my needs. David thought I should sell it. "We don't need 2 cars," he said. "Susan and I shared 1 car for years. It's more economical, better for the environment. We can use my car for everything." "But what if I need to go somewhere when you're out?" I asked. "Like where? You don't work anymore. You're not taking classes. Your friends." He trailed off meaningfully. Susan never minded sharing. She said it actually brought us closer, having to coordinate and communicate about our schedules. I sold the car. The money went into our joint account. David said we'd use it for a vacation, somewhere Susan had always wanted to go but never got the chance. We never took that vacation. Without my car, I was truly trapped. David drove me to the grocery store once a week. He drove me to church on Sundays. He drove me to my monthly doctor's appointments. Everywhere I went, he knew about it. He was there. The physical symptoms started in September. I felt tired all the time. Not the normal tiredness of being in my 60s, but a bone-deep exhaustion that never lifted. I had no appetite. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. I started losing weight. Susan went through something similar, David said when I mentioned it. She was just stressed. She needed to relax more, not worry so much about every little thing. But I was worried. As a nurse, I knew something was wrong. I made an appointment with my doctor for a full physical. David drove me, sat in the waiting room, came back with me when the nurse called my name. "Actually," I said hesitantly to the nurse, "I'd prefer if my husband waited out here for the exam." David's face went cold. Susan always wanted me with her for medical appointments. She valued my input on her health decisions. The doctor found nothing obviously wrong. My blood work was slightly off. I was anemic. My vitamin D was low, but nothing alarming. She suggested I was probably depressed and prescribed an antidepressant. I didn't take it. Something told me that would make things worse, being medicated and unable to think clearly. The depression diagnosis became David's new favorite weapon. Whenever I disagreed with him about anything, whenever I tried to assert any independence, he'd look at me with concern and say, "Margaret, are you taking your medication?" Susan never let her emotions override her good sense. "Maybe you should talk to your doctor about adjusting your dosage." I wasn't taking the medication, but I couldn't tell him that, so I just nodded and tried to be quieter. Smaller, less trouble. By October, I was barely eating. I'd force down a few bites at meals to avoid David's comments, but everything made me nauseous. I'd lost 23 pounds. My clothes hung off my frame. I looked skeletal. Susan was always so good about maintaining her figure, David said one morning as I stood at the bathroom mirror. Even during her illness, she took pride in her appearance. You should try harder, Margaret. This weight loss isn't attractive. I stared at my reflection. I looked like a ghost. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, skin like paper. I looked like I was dying. Maybe I was. On October 28th, a Tuesday evening, I attempted to make David's favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the way Susan used to make it. He'd given me her recipe, handwritten on an index card in her neat cursive. I'd made this same pot roast at least a dozen times, never getting it quite right according to David. I stood at the stove, stirring the gravy, and suddenly the room started spinning. The spoon fell from my hand. I reached for the counter to steady myself, but my legs gave out. The last thing I remember before hitting the floor was the sound of the pot crashing beside me, hot gravy splashing everywhere. I came to in David's car. He was driving fast, one hand on my shoulder. "Stay with me, Margaret, we're almost there. You just got dizzy from the steam. You didn't drink enough water today." Susan used to remind me all the time to stay hydrated while cooking. Even as I drifted in and out of consciousness, he was comparing me to her. The ER was bright and cold. Nurses swarmed around me, taking vitals, asking questions. David stood at the foot of the gurney, explaining to everyone who'd listen. She was cooking dinner. I think she got overheated from standing over the stove. She tripped over our dog trying to catch herself. She hit her head on the way down. We didn't have a dog. We'd never had a dog. Susan had been allergic. A young doctor pulled the curtain around my bed. "Dr. Chen," his badge said. He couldn't have been more than 35. He smiled kindly at me. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to do a quick examination, okay? Your husband said you fell?" I nodded weakly. He checked my pupils, felt my skull for injuries, examined the bruises on my arms and legs. His hands were gentle, but I saw his expression change as he worked. His smile faded. His jaw tightened. "I'm going to order some tests," he said. "I'll be right back." He returned 20 minutes later. David had stepped out to make a phone call to his daughter. Dr. Chen pulled up a stool and sat down close to my bed. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that?" I nodded. "How long have you been losing weight?" "Since July, maybe. 3 or 4 months. That's about 25 pounds based on your last recorded weight here. Have you been trying to lose weight?" "No. I haven't been hungry." "Are you eating at all?" "A little. Maybe 1 meal a day, sometimes less." He made a note. "These bruises on your arms and legs. How did you get them?" I looked down at my arms. I hadn't even noticed them. Yellow-green marks, some fresh, some fading. "I don't know. I bruise easily now." "Do you fall often?" "Sometimes. I get dizzy." "What about these marks on your wrists?" He gently lifted my right hand. There were red marks, almost like rope burns, around both wrists. I stared at them, confused. I don't know." Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very softly, "Mrs. Patterson, I've been an ER doctor for 8 years. I've seen a lot of patients in situations like yours. Your blood work shows severe malnutrition. Your vitamin levels are critically low. You're severely dehydrated. You have bruising in various stages of healing all over your body. And those marks on your wrists concern me. I told you. I don't know how." "I'm not accusing you of anything," he interrupted gently. "But I need to ask, do you feel safe at home?" The question hung in the air between us. Do you feel safe at home? Such a simple question, but hearing it out loud from someone who wasn't David, who didn't know Susan, who was looking at me with genuine concern rather than disappointment, something inside me cracked open. "No," I whispered. "No, I don't." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Can you tell me why?" And suddenly, it all came pouring out. The comparisons, the isolation, the financial control, the way David had systematically dismantled my entire life, piece by piece, always in Susan's name. The way I'd stopped eating because cooking had become such a source of stress and criticism. The way I couldn't leave the house without him. The way I'd lost myself so completely that I didn't even recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking, my throat raw from crying, he handed me a tissue. "Margaret, what you're describing is a pattern of abuse called coercive control. It's psychological and emotional abuse designed to isolate and dominate you. The comparing you to his late wife, the gradual isolation from friends and support systems, the financial dependence, the constant criticism, these are all classic tactics." "But he's never hit me," I protested weakly. "Abuse doesn't have to be physical to be devastating. What you've endured is absolutely abuse." He paused. "I'm also concerned about your malnutrition. Margaret, you're in what we call a state of severe neglect. Whether that's self-neglect due to depression or something more deliberate on your husband's part, I can't say. But you're in danger. Your body is shutting down. What do I do?" The question came out as a sob. "First, I'm admitting you to the hospital. You need IV fluids, nutrition support, and a full medical workup. Second, I'm going to have our social worker come talk to you. She specializes in situations like this. Third," he hesitated. "Third, you need to decide if you want to go back to that house." David returned then, pushing through the curtain with a concerned smile. "How is she, doctor? Is she going to be okay?" Dr. Chen stood, his body language shifting, becoming more formal. "We're admitting Mrs. Patterson for observation and treatment. She's severely malnourished and dehydrated." David's smile faded. "Malnourished? But I make sure she eats. Susan always said 3 meals a day." "Mr. Patterson, doctor," Chen interrupted, his voice firm. "Your wife needs immediate medical intervention. The nursing staff will get her settled upstairs. You can visit during regular visiting hours." "But I'm her husband. I should stay with her. Susan would have wanted me to." "Visiting hours are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Dr. Chen repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. I spent 5 days in the hospital. They fed me through an IV at first, then gradually introduced solid foods. The social worker, a kind woman named Patricia, visited me every day. She explained my options: domestic violence shelters, legal aid for divorce, protective orders. She gave me phone numbers, resources, a safety plan. My daughter Rebecca flew in from Seattle, 8 weeks postpartum with my new grandson. When she walked into my hospital room and saw me, she burst into tears. "Mom," she sobbed, gripping my hand, "what did he do to you?" I told her everything. She listened with growing horror, then fury. "You're not going back there," she said flatly. "You're coming to Seattle with me." Michael already agreed. "We've got your room set up. We're going to take care of you." "But the house." "Is his house, Mom. You sold yours, remember? You have nothing tying you to him." "But I'm married to him." "And we'll get you unmarried. But first, we're getting you safe and healthy." The divorce was finalized 6 months later. David fought it initially, kept insisting that Susan would have never given up on their marriage, that I was throwing away something precious. His lawyer painted me as unstable, depressed, abandoning a kind man who'd only wanted to help me heal. But my lawyer was better. We had Dr. Chen's medical records. We had testimony from Rebecca and Michael about my isolation. We had bank statements showing how David had drained our joint account. We had documentation of the sale of my house and my car, all the money going into accounts I couldn't access. Most damning, we had Susan's medical records. David's late wife hadn't died of breast cancer like he'd told everyone. She died of complications from severe malnutrition and organ failure. The medical examiner had noted signs of long-term neglect and potential abuse, but no charges had ever been filed. David had done this before. I wasn't his first victim. I was just the first one who'd survived. The judge granted me an annulment on the grounds of fraud. I got back the money from selling my house and car. I didn't get back the year I'd lost or the woman I'd been before David. That Margaret died in his kitchen the day I collapsed. But I'm building a new Margaret. I live with Rebecca and her family in Seattle now. I help with my grandchildren. I take watercolor classes every Tuesday at the community center. I go to lunch with new friends whenever I want. I drive my own car. I make my own choices. And I volunteer at a domestic violence shelter, sharing my story with other women who think abuse has to look like fists and black eyes. I tell them about the subtle erosion, the gradual isolation, the death by 1,000 comparisons. I tell them what Dr. Chen told me in that ER. You are not crazy. You are not imagining it. You are not overreacting. If you feel unsafe, you are unsafe. Trust yourself. I'm 64 now. I survived something I never imagined I'd face at this stage of life. I learned that abuse doesn't have an age limit, that predators come in all forms, even kind-looking widowers at grief support groups. I learned that the phrase my late wife would have can be as dangerous as any weapon. And I learned that it's never too late to save yourself, to ask for help, to walk away. Even at 63, collapsed on a kitchen floor, thinking you're dying, it's not too late. If you're reading this and something sounds familiar, if someone in your life is constantly comparing you to someone else, constantly finding you lacking, constantly eroding who you are, please listen. You deserve better. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not criticized for who you're not. You deserve to take watercolor classes if you want to. You deserve to have friends. You deserve to drive your own car and make your own choices and eat Eggs Benedict for brunch if that's what you like. You deserve to be free. And if you're in danger, if you recognize yourself in my story, please reach out. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Talk to your doctor. Tell someone you trust. Don't wait until you're collapsing on your kitchen floor. I almost didn't make it out, but I did. And you can too. You are not alone. You are stronger than you know, and you are worth saving.